What happens when filmmakers decide to wage war against censorship itself? When the camera becomes a weapon and the screen turns into a battlefield of outrage, defiance, and blood-soaked rebellion? The Grindhouse era answered with fire chaos and absolute madness. These weren't just movies, they were cinematic riots. Today, we dig deep into the celluloid gutter to uncover 15 Grindhouse films that screamed one thing loud and clear: to hell with censors. Number 15. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Few films in history have ignited such outrage as Cannibal Holocaust. Marketed as a shocking travelogue of lost explorers and savage tribes, it instead became one of the most banned films ever made. Director Ruggero Deodato used documentary-style realism so convincing that authorities believed it was a genuine snuff film. The cast had signed contracts promising to disappear for a year, fueling the illusion further. Authorities arrested Deodato for suspected murder until he brought the actors to court, alive, proving no real killings occurred. At least not human ones. The movie's scenes of animal cruelty led to bans in over 50 countries and lifelong debate over its ethics. Critics called it depraved yet pioneering. Fans hailed it as genius commentary on media exploitation. Over decades, Cannibal Holocaust rose from banned obscurity to cult legend, inspiring found-footage horror and exposing our appetite for shock. In the end, the film that was once destroyed by censors survived as a brutal mirror of our voyeuristic world. Number 14. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. When Mir Zarchi unleashed I Spit on Your Grave, audiences fled theaters. Critics demanded it be burned. Censors in multiple nations banned it outright. Yet beneath its violent revenge plot lay a rage that spoke to something primal and political. The story follows Jennifer Hills, a writer who retreats to the countryside only to be attacked by local men. She survives and takes vengeance on each one with ruthless precision. The film's raw minimalism, no music, no glamour, made it unbearable to watch and impossible to forget. Censors condemned it as obscene. Feminist groups were divided, some seeing it as exploitative, others as a raw cry for empowerment. Zarchi refused to cut scenes or apologize, claiming the brutality was the point. Over time, the movie found defenders among horror scholars who recognized its fearless attack on misogyny and violence. Today, I Spit on Your Grave stands as the embodiment of Grindhouse defiance, ugly, relentless, and disturbingly honest. It wasn't designed to entertain. It was designed to wound. Number 13. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Before he became a horror legend, Wes Craven was an academic with dark questions about human nature. The Last House on the Left was his disturbing answer. Loosely based on Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, this film followed two teenage girls kidnapped and tormented by criminals. Before the tables turned in shocking fashion, Craven used documentary grit and emotional whiplash to blur lines between good and evil. The violence was so raw that projectionists reportedly fainted. Censors hacked the movie to pieces, yet audiences still lined up around blocks. Posters screamed, "Keep telling yourself it's only a movie," a phrase that became legendary. Behind the scenes, Craven fought distributors who demanded extra blood and shock value. He wanted a moral film, but the Grindhouse system demanded excess. The result was a chaotic hybrid of exploitation and art. Decades later, The Last House on the Left is hailed as the birth of modern American horror. It exposed how easily civility crumbles when pushed to extremes. For censors, it was too much to handle. For audiences, it was too real to ignore. Number 12. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. When the Texas Chainsaw Massacre hit drive-ins in the summer of 1974, no one was ready for the nightmare it unleashed. Tobe Hooper's low-budget masterpiece wasn't a slasher. It was a fever dream of American decay, filmed under the scorching Texas sun, where meat hooks and madness ruled. The movie claimed to be based on a true story, a half-truth inspired by the real-life crimes of Ed Gein. And that marketing trick alone terrified millions. Audiences screamed, critics condemned, censors panicked. Britain's Board of Film Classification refused certification for decades. In several American states, theater owners faced police raids for screening it. The film's violence was mostly implied. Yet, the psychological horror was so suffocating it felt unbearable. The smell of rot sweat and fear clung to every frame. Behind the scenes, production was pure endurance. Actors fainted under the heat and the stench of animal carcasses used on set. Gunnar Hansen, the man behind Leatherface, endured bruises, burns, and suffocation inside his mask. Hooper shot long, exhausting days, trying to finish before funds ran dry. Over time, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre evolved from outlaw cinema to cultural monument. It redefined horror without showing much blood, and it revealed a nation haunted by its own family values gone rancid. For censors, it was chaos. For audiences, it was revelation. The chainsaw didn't just cut through flesh. It cut through America's denial. Number 11. Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. 1965. Russ Meyer's Faster. Pussycat Kill Kill roared across the desert like a cinematic rebellion wearing black leather and rage. Released in 1965 at the height of Hollywood censorship, it tore apart every moral expectation. The movie followed three go-go dancers turned highway bandits who sped through the Mojave Desert, leaving destruction in their wake. Censors were horrified. The film's aggression, its women driving fast cars and smashing skulls, shattered the fragile gender norms of mid-60s America. Critics dismissed it as sleaze. But beneath the surface, it was a feminist howl decades before the word became mainstream. The women weren't victims. They were predators in a world built to cage them. Production was wild. Meyer shot on a shoestring budget in the blazing heat, pushing his cast beyond exhaustion. Tura Satana, the unforgettable lead, performed her own stunts, channeling a lifetime of anger into every movement. She became a symbol of revenge, power, and control. An icon, later embraced by punk culture and Tarantino himself. The film was banned or heavily censored in several territories for its violence and moral corruption. But time proved Meyer right. Faster Pussycat Kill. Kill turned into the ultimate Grindhouse anthem, bold, fearless, and unapologetically defiant. It wasn't exploitation. It was liberation filmed in black and white rage. Number 10. Ilsa, she-wolf of the SS. 1975. In 1975, a Canadian film crew decided to build a fake Nazi camp and unleash one of the most controversial Grindhouse films ever made. Ilsa, she-wolf of the SS, told the story of a sadistic commandant obsessed with human endurance and control. What followed was outrage across continents. Censors banned it immediately, calling it obscene and dangerous. Yet the movie refused to die. Filmed on the leftover sets of the TV series Hogan's Heroes, the production blended historical horror with pure exploitation. Diane Thorne played Ilsa with terrifying authority, commanding both the screen and the viewer's fear. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Was it an attack on fascism or an act of cinematic insanity? The answer was both. Germany outlawed it instantly. Britain banned it for decades. Even Canada tried to bury it. But the Grindhouse circuit kept it alive, whispering its name like forbidden scripture. Midnight audiences treated it as a dare. Could you handle it without flinching? Behind the madness, there was strange craftsmanship. Director Don Edmonds and Thorne pushed beyond limits to create something unforgettable, not just for shock, but for confrontation. The film spawned sequels and imitators, but none captured its raw audacity. Today, Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS stands as a monument to Grindhouse extremity, an unholy fusion of exploitation and protest that screamed truth through exaggeration. For the censors, it was an abomination. For the underground, it was legend. Number 9. The Beyond. 1981. Lucio Fulci's The Beyond wasn't just another Italian horror film. It was a descent into madness itself. Released in 1981, it became one of the most visually nightmarish works of the Grindhouse era. The film follows a woman who inherits a crumbling Louisiana hotel, only to discover it sits on one of the 7 gates of hell. What unfolds defies logic and sanity. Fulci drenched every frame in surreal terror. Eyes melt, flesh dissolves. Reality collapses. Censors across Europe called it depraved and banned it immediately. The British Board of Film Classification placed it on the infamous Video Nasties list, ensuring it disappeared from shelves for years. Yet horror fans whispered about it, traded bootlegs, and worshipped its dreamlike power. The production was chaotic. Fulci worked with tiny budgets, using coffee grounds for rotworms and syrup for blood. Actors endured endless takes through clouds of smoke and stench. Crew members later described the set as cursed after strange accidents occurred. For decades, the Beyond was dismissed as mindless gore, but later critics rediscovered its brilliance. Beneath the splatter lay surreal artistry influenced by Dali and Bosch. Fulci wasn't making horror for realism. He was painting nightmares. Today, it's considered a masterpiece of Italian grindhouse horror, a hallucinatory vision that dared censors to look away. The result was simple: they couldn't. Number 8. Switchblade Sisters, 1975. When Jack Hill released Switchblade Sisters, the world wasn't ready for girl gangs with knives, rebellion, and politics sharper than steel. Marketed as a teenage delinquent film, it evolved into one of the boldest feminist statements of the Grindhouse movement. It told the story of Lace Maggie and their all-girl gang, the Dagger Debs, as they fought rival groups and corruption within their own ranks. Censors tried to frame it as dangerous juvenile garbage. But the movie wasn't about crime. It was about rage and survival in a man's world. Hill crafted it as a rebellion against patriarchy, disguised as exploitation. The dialogue was fast, the violence stylized, and the energy unstoppable. Critics at the time called it trash. Years later, Quentin Tarantino called it art. Production was rough. Hill shot in rough Los Angeles neighborhoods, dodging real gang activity. The cast performed stunts themselves with minimal safety. Tensions rose on set, but what emerged was pure electricity. Audiences rejected it initially, yet it found salvation on home video in the 90s, when cult film fans finally recognized its genius. Today, Switchblade Sisters is taught in film schools as subversive cinema, a story that mocked censorship by existing at all. It proved that rebellion wears eyeliner and wields a switchblade. Number 7. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. Swedish cinema rarely shocked the world, but Thriller, A Cruel Picture did it with icy precision. Directed by Bo Arnavibenius, it followed a mute woman named Madeline, who becomes a ruthless assassin after suffering brutal abuse. The film's mixture of vengeance and cold artistry created uproar worldwide. Censors were enraged. Sweden banned it instantly, calling it moral poison. Even edited versions were too intense for television. Yet grindhouse theaters across Europe treated it like forbidden treasure. Its slow-motion gunfights inspired filmmakers from Tarantino to Nicholas Winding Refn, who called it one of his biggest influences. Production was guerrilla. Style. Vibenius used friends as crew and shot illegally in public places to save money. The camera lingered on every act of violence, creating a hypnotic rhythm of beauty and brutality. The lead actress, Christina Lindberg, performed stunts herself, often in dangerous conditions. Despite being blacklisted in Sweden, the film found a devoted following abroad. In Japan, it became a midnight sensation. In America, it was rebranded as They Call Her One Eye, and shown in drive-ins to stunned audiences. Thriller, A Cruel Picture wasn't about realism. It was about control, a woman reclaiming her power in a world that silenced her. For censors, it crossed every line. For cinema, it drew new ones. Number 6. Maniac, 1980. William Lustig's Maniac crawled from the grimy gutters of New York and dragged audiences straight into a killer's mind. Released in 1980, this low-budget shocker was condemned before it even premiered. Critics called it immoral. Censors in Britain placed it on the video nasties list. Newspapers demanded it be destroyed. Yet underground fans couldn't look away. The story followed Frank Zito, a deranged loner haunted by his abusive childhood, who roamed city streets at night, hunting victims and keeping grisly trophies. It wasn't stylized horror. It was raw documentary dread. Joe Spinell, who also co-wrote the script, delivered a terrifyingly human performance. You could almost feel his sweat, fear, and delusion. Filming was guerrilla warfare. Lustig and Spinell shot without permits, using real New York streets at dawn. Explosions and gunfire scenes were filmed so fast, they often fled before police arrived. The famous head-blowing shotgun scene, done by effects master Tom Savini, became legend, and the reason censors went wild. They called it depraved, but it was revolutionary in practical effects. For years, Maniac was banned in several countries, including New Zealand and Germany, but time changed everything. Modern critics hailed it as an unflinching portrait of loneliness and decay. It inspired countless imitators, and a faithful remake in 2012. What began as a condemned Grindhouse nightmare became an artifact of urban despair. Lustig didn't just make horror, he filmed America's sickness. Number 5. Ms. 45, 1981. Abel Ferrara's Ms. 45 struck like lightning through the veins of 80s New York. It was gritty, loud, defiant, and deeply misunderstood. The story centered on Thana, a mute seamstress, who after surviving violent trauma, transforms into a silent avenger, stalking the city's dark alleys, armed with a .45 caliber pistol. Censors loathed it. They accused Ferrara of glorifying violence and immorality. In Britain, it was banned outright. In America, it was heavily edited for theaters. But for those who saw the uncut prints, Ms. 45 was something else. An angry poem about power and corruption in a city devouring itself. Behind the camera, chaos ruled. Ferrara directed under constant threat of shutdown, with police patrolling sets at night. Actress Zoe Lund, only 17 at the time, carried the movie with icy brilliance. Her transformation from victim to executioner felt mythic. Critics dismissed it in its day, but later scholars re-evaluated Ms. 45 as feminist art disguised as exploitation. Ferrara never apologized for its brutality because it mirrored the real violence of New York streets. Over decades, it rose from obscurity to cult immortality. Underground screenings drew packed houses. Musicians and directors from Sonic Youth to Tarantino hailed it as a Grindhouse masterpiece. Thana didn't just fight back. She silenced the system. The censors tried to erase her, but she became eternal. Number 4. Suspiria, 1977. When Dario Argento unleashed Suspiria in 1977, it redefined horror as opera, a kaleidoscope of color, violence, and witchcraft. It told the story of Susie Bannion, an American dancer who enrolls in a German ballet academy, only to uncover a coven of witches behind the mirrors. The result was visual sorcery that terrified and mesmerized in equal measure. Censors didn't know how to handle it. They had seen gore before, but not like this. Painted in crimson light, choreographed like ballet. The film was banned or heavily cut in several countries for its intensity and occult imagery. Critics in Italy called it evil propaganda. Audiences fainted at screenings in Paris and London. Argento's production was nightmarish. He shot with experimental lighting gels that burned hot enough to melt film stock. The soundtrack by Goblin was recorded before shooting and blasted on set to frighten actors in real time. The result was sensory overload, an art film disguised as pure terror. For years, Suspiria circulated in censored prints, missing key moments of Argento's vision. Only in later restorations did audiences witness its full glory. Today, it's hailed as a masterpiece of sound and color, influencing generations of filmmakers. In the end, Suspiria wasn't just censored. It transcended censorship. It turned fear into art, and art into defiance. Argento didn't flinch. He painted horror with a brush soaked in blood and beauty. Number 3. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's The Devils is perhaps the most censored film in British history. Released in 1971, it ripped the curtain off church hypocrisy, state control, and the madness of mass hysteria. Based on Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun, the film told the true story of a French priest accused of heresy and witchcraft during a plague of religious panic. Censors were horrified from the first frame. The film's imagery of burning flesh and religious frenzy was too much for conservative Britain. Warner Brothers demanded cuts before release, but even the edited version was banned in several countries, including Italy and Ireland. Critics either hailed it as genius or condemned it as blasphemy. There was no middle ground. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Russell built enormous sets of white brick cathedrals inspired by modernist architecture. The cast, including Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave, gave raw performances that left them physically and emotionally drained. Reed's portrayal of Father Grandier became one of the most intense in film history. For decades, The Devils existed in fragments. The uncut version was buried in studio vaults, rumored destroyed. Only in the digital era did portions resurface, allowing new generations to witness Russell's full vision. It remains a towering symbol of artistic rebellion. The film dared to confront faith, power, and fear with unflinching audacity. When censors screamed sacrilege, Russell smiled and declared he was showing truth. The Devil's wasn't horror, it was exorcism of society itself. Number 2. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. After Cannibal Holocaust shook the world, Umberto Lenzi decided to go even further. His Cannibal Ferox, released in 1981, was marketed as the most violent film ever made. It lived up to that reputation and paid the price. Banned in more than 30 countries, it became another staple of the infamous Video Nasties list. The story followed anthropologists traveling to the Amazon to debunk myths of cannibalism, only to encounter a nightmare of revenge and survival. The film blurred fiction and reality with shocking realism. Animal cruelty scenes caused public uproar and court battles. Critics called it barbaric. Distributors were arrested in the United Kingdom. Behind the camera, Lenzi faced dangerous conditions, shooting deep in Colombian jungles. Crew members suffered infections. Film stock nearly melted in the humidity, yet Lenzi pressed on, claiming his goal was to expose Western arrogance rather than glorify violence. For years, Cannibal Ferox was impossible to find, except on bootleg tapes passed secretly among collectors. When it resurfaced in the late 90s, uncut, it became a relic of forbidden cinema, a time when filmmakers challenged limits, not for fame, but for fury. Modern critics still debate its meaning. But one thing is clear, Cannibal Ferox spit in the face of censorship with unrelenting energy. It showed that Grindhouse was never about comfort. It was about shock as truth. Number 1. Taxi Driver, 1976. Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver may not have been marketed as Grindhouse, but its spirit was pure rebellion. Released in 1976, it captured urban decay with such brutal honesty that it felt like a documentary from hell. Travis Bickle, the lonely New York cabbie, played by Robert De Niro, became a symbol of alienation, rage, and collapse. Censors nearly killed the film before release. The climactic shootout was deemed too violent. The MPAA threatened an X rating unless Scorsese toned it down. Instead of cutting footage, he simply darkened the color of the blood to fool the censors. The trick worked, and the film was released. Though outrage followed instantly, audiences were stunned. Politicians called it dangerous. Journalists called it immoral. Yet it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and went on to influence generations. Behind the scenes, De Niro drove real taxis for weeks preparing for his role. Jodie Foster, only 12 at the time, required constant supervision and psychological protection. The set was gritty, the atmosphere toxic, yet somehow the chaos produced art. Years later, the film gained even darker infamy after it reportedly inspired a real-life assassination attempt on U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Censors tried to shift blame, but Scorsese stood firm. Taxi Driver was never an instruction manual. It was a mirror reflecting society's sickness. Today, the film stands as the bridge between Grindhouse and mainstream art. It proved that cinema could disturb the world and still win awards. For the censors, Taxi Driver was a scandal. For history, it was prophecy. Grindhouse wasn't about comfort or clarity. It was cinema's middle finger to authority. Each of these films shattered rules, burned through censorship, and spoke truths others were too afraid to show. So what do you think? Were these provocations worth it or too far? Let us know below. Like, subscribe, and stay fearless in the dark.